wiped the sweat from his brow as he watched the alien creature pace restlessly in the makeshift corral. The beast stood nearly 8 feet tall, its muscular frame covered in scales that shifted from deep purple to silver depending on the light. 4 powerful legs ended in clawed feet that could tear through steel, and its elongated neck supported a head filled with razor-sharp teeth. Most unsettling were its eyes, intelligent, calculating, and filled with what could only describe as malevolent hunger. The other colonists called it though doubted that was its real name. The alien traders who had brought it to 442b claimed it was a domesticated riding animal, perfect for traversing the planet's rough terrain. They had demanded an enormous payment in rare minerals, but the colony's administrator had been desperate. The terraforming equipment was failing, supply ships were delayed, and they needed a way to reach the mineral deposits in the northern mountains before winter set in. Had been against the purchase from the beginning. He was the colony's, and something about the creature's behavior patterns troubled him deeply. The way it watched them, the way it tested the strength of its restraints when it thought no one was looking, the way it seemed to be learning their routines and weaknesses. This was no domesticated animal. Still having doubts, he turned to see Dr. Sarah, his wife of 12 years, approaching with her medical scanner in hand. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and despite the harsh conditions of their new world, she still managed to maintain the calm, professional demeanor that had made her one of the most respected doctors in the colonial medical corps. "More than doubts," replied, gesturing toward the... "Look at its posture, Sarah. The way it holds its head, the muscle tension in its legs. This thing is a predator and it's assessing us as prey." Sarah followed his gaze, her expression thoughtful. The creature had stopped packing and was now staring directly at them, its head tilted at an angle that somehow seemed calculating. "The traders provided extensive documentation about its care and training," she said, though her voice carried a note of uncertainty. "Documentation that could be completely fabricated," countered. "We know almost nothing about the Trade Federation, and what we do know suggests they're not exactly known for their honesty in business dealings." The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted their conversation. Colony Administrator James strode toward them, flanked by 2 security officers. Was a thin man in his 50s, with graying hair and the perpetually stressed expression of someone trying to keep a struggling colony alive against impossible odds. Doctor addressed, his tone clipped and businesslike. "I need you to complete your assessment of the creature. We're planning to begin training exercises tomorrow morning." "Sir, I strongly advise against that," said. "I need more time to study its behavior patterns. Everything I've observed suggests this animal is potentially dangerous to human handlers." His jaw tightened. "Doctor, I appreciate your caution, but we don't have the luxury of extended observation periods. The weather satellites show a major storm system developing in the northern hemisphere. If we don't establish mining operations in the mountains within the next 6 weeks, we'll lose our window until spring. That means another 8 months of rationing supplies, and hopping the terraforming equipment doesn't fail completely." Sarah stepped closer to her husband and could feel her tension. She understood the colony's precarious situation as well as anyone. As the chief medical officer, she had been the one to report on the increasing cases of malnutrition, vitamin deficiencies, and stress-related disorders among the colonists. "What if is right?" Sarah asked. "What if this creature is more dangerous than the traders claimed? We can't afford to lose any more people." His expression softened slightly when he looked at Sarah. Everyone in the colony respected her, and her medical reports carried significant weight in administrative decisions. "Doctor," he said, using her title formally, "your husband's concerns are noted, but we've taken precautions. The training will be conducted by our most experienced animal handlers with full security backup. If the creature shows any signs of aggressive behavior, we'll abort the program immediately." Wanted to argue further, but he could see the desperate determination in his eyes. The administrator was gambling everything on this alien creature because he had no other choices left. The supply ship that should have arrived 3 months ago was still missing, presumed lost. The automated mining equipment had broken down beyond repair, and the replacement parts wouldn't arrive for another year, if at all. "At least let me be present during the initial training sessions," said finally. "If something goes wrong, I might be able to provide insights into the creature's behavior that could save lives." Nodded, agreed, "But I need you to understand something. This colony is hanging by a thread. If we can't establish those mining operations, we'll have to seriously consider evacuation. That means abandoning 3 years of work and admitting failure to the Colonial Council. After left and Sarah stood in silence, watching the creature had resumed its packing, but now it seemed more agitated, as if it had understood the conversation somehow. "You really think it's that dangerous?" Sarah asked quietly. Nodded grimly. "I think we're about to find out just how much the traders lied to us, and I'm afraid the cost is going to be higher than anyone realizes." The next morning arrived gray and overcast, with the perpetual wind that characterized 442B's weather patterns. Arrived at the training area early, hopping to observe this behavior before the handlers arrived. The creature was standing perfectly still in the center of the corral, its head raised as if scenting the air. The lead animal handler, Tom, was a grizzled veteran who had worked with everything from earth horses to the six-legged pack animals of. He approached the corral with confidence, carrying a set of restraints, and what the alien traders had claimed was a traditional bridle. "Morning, Doc," called out to, ready to see this beauty in action. Wanted to voice his concerns again, but was already entering the corral. The turned toward him, and for a moment thought he saw something almost like anticipation in the creature's eyes. The first few minutes went smoothly. They allowed to approach and even seemed to submit to having the bridle placed over its head. The creature's demeanor was calm, almost docile, and began to wonder if perhaps his fears had been unfounded. Attached a lead line and began walking around the corral. The creature followed obediently, its gait smooth and controlled. Several other colonists had gathered to watch, including who wore an expression of obvious relief. Steed called out, "I think you were being overly cautious. The creature seems perfectly manageable." Was about to respond when he noticed a subtle change in this posture. Its ears had flattened against its head, and the muscles in its shoulders were tensing. The creature's eyes were no longer focused on, but were scanning the crowd of observers. Called out urgently, "Something's wrong, get out of there now." The handler looked confused. "Doc, the animal's fine, it's responding perfectly to." The struck without warning. In a movement too fast for human eyes to follow, it spun and lashed out with its hind legs, flew through the air and slammed into the corral fence with a sickening crack. The creature then turned its attention to the crowd of observers, its lips pulling back to reveal rows of gleaming teeth. Chaos erupted as colonists scattered in all directions. The security officers raised their weapons, but the was already moving, leaping over the corral fence with impossible grace. Grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her toward the nearest building as the creature landed among the fleeing colonists. This hunting instincts were terrifyingly efficient. It seemed to single out the weakest or slowest targets, using its speed and agility to cut off escape routes. Watched in horror as it cornered Jenny, a young engineer who had stumbled while running. The creature's massive head descended toward her, jaws opening wide. The security officers opened fire, their plasma rifles sending bright bolts of energy toward the alien predator. Most of the shots missed, but one caught Thee in the shoulder, spinning it around and causing it to release an ear-splitting shriek of rage and pain. Rather than retreating, the wound seemed to enrage the creature further. It abandoned its attack on Jenny and charged straight toward the armed security team. The officers scattered, but the was faster. It caught Officer Martinez with a swipe of its clawed forelimb, sending him sprawling across the ground. Realized with growing horror that their weapons were barely affecting the creature. The plasma bolts that should have dropped any Earth animal were only serving to anger its scales seemed to be dissipating much of the energy from their shots. "Sarah, get to the medical center," shouted over the sounds of battle. "Prepare for casualties." She squeezed his hand briefly. "What about you?" "I'm going to try to stop this thing before it kills someone." Sarah's eyes widened. "No, you don't have any weapons, and—" "I'm the only one here who understands xenobiology," he interrupted. "There has to be a weakness, some behavioral pattern I can exploit." Before Sarah could protest further, was running toward his laboratory. Behind him, he could hear the continued sounds of the battle as more security personnel arrived to engage the rampaging. In his lab, frantically pulled up all the research files he had compiled about the creature. There had to be something, some detail that would give him an advantage. The alien trader's documentation was clearly fraudulent, but perhaps there were clues hidden within the lies. He scrolled through behavioral patterns, dietary requirements, and physiological data, searching for anything that might help. Then he found it, a brief mention of this acute sensitivity to specific electromagnetic frequencies. The traders had dismissed it as a minor quirk, claiming it was why the creatures sometimes became skittish around certain types of machinery. Rushed to his equipment locker and pulled out a portable M-field generator, normally used for studying the electrical patterns in alien nervous systems. If he could tune it to the right frequency, it might be enough to disorient or disable the creature. When he emerged from the lab, the situation had grown worse. The had cornered a group of colonists near the main complex, including several children from the colony school. The security team was trying to get a clear shot, but they couldn't risk hitting the civilians. Activated the M generator and began adjusting the frequency, hoping he could remember the exact specifications mentioned in the documentation. The device hummed to life, emitting an invisible field that made his teeth ache. The effect on though was immediate and dramatic. The creature stopped mid-attack, its head jerking up as if it had been struck. It began to shake violently, its coordination clearly affected by whatever the M field was doing to its nervous system. "Now," shouted to the security team, "hit it now while it's disoriented." A concentrated barrage of plasma fire struck the staggered creature. This time, the shots found their mark, and the collapse to the ground, its body convulsing before finally going still. The sudden silence was almost as shocking as the violence that had preceded it. Kept the M generator running for several more seconds, wanting to be certain the creature was truly dead before approaching. Sarah was already moving among the wounded, her medical training taking over as she triaged the injuries. Was alive but unconscious, with what looked like several broken ribs and a possible concussion. Officer Martinez had deep lacerations on his arm but was stable. Miraculously, none of the civilians had been seriously injured, though several were in shock. Approached, his face pale and drawn. "Doctor, I owe you an apology. You were right about the creature, and I should have listened to your warnings." Nodded, but his attention was focused on something else. As he studied the dead, he noticed details that had been hidden while it was alive. The creature's scales showed signs of surgical scarring, and there were small metal implants visible beneath the skin near its skull. Said slowly, "I don't think this was just a case of the traders lying about a wild animal. Look at these modifications." The administrator knelt beside the creature's corpse, following's pointing finger. "What am I looking at?" "Neural implants, surgical modifications to enhance aggression and predatory behavior. This creature didn't just happen to be dangerous, it was deliberately engineered to be a weapon." The implications hit immediately. "You're saying the traders sent us a biological weapon disguised as a riding animal?" "That's exactly what I'm saying. The question is why? What do they gain from attacking a small human colony?" As if in answer to his question, his communication device chirped with an incoming message from the colony's orbital sensors. The automated voice was calm and mechanical, but the words sent ice through his veins. "Attention Colony Administration. Long-range sensors have detected multiple vessels approaching the system. Estimated arrival time, 72 hours. Configuration suggests military fleet composition." And stared at each other in growing understanding. The hadn't been meant as a simple weapon to kill colonists. It had been a test, a way to assess the colony's defenses and capabilities before the real attack began. "We need to prepare," said grimly. "If they think we're easy prey, they're about to learn what happens when you underestimate human determination." Looked down at the dead creature, then back at the damaged but unbroken colony around them. They had made a critical error in their assessment. They had assumed that humans would respond to a biological threat the same way as other species, with panic and disorganization. Instead, they had revealed their intentions to a species that had learned to survive in the harshest environments in the galaxy. A species that could analyze, adapt, and overcome challenges that would destroy lesser civilizations. The attack had been meant to weaken them. Instead, it had given them advance warning and a chance to prepare. As helped Sarah treat the wounded and began coordinating defensive preparations, he couldn't help but think that they were about to discover just how dangerous it could be to threaten human families and communities. The real battle was still to come, but was no longer afraid. He was angry, and an angry human with time to prepare was one of the most formidable forces in the known galaxy. The next 72 hours transformed New Eden Colony from a struggling agricultural outpost into a fortress. watched with growing pride as his fellow humans displayed the ingenuity and determination that had carried their species across the stars. Sarah worked tirelessly in the medical center, not just treating the wounded from the attack, but preparing for the casualties that would inevitably come. She had converted the colony's main meeting hall into an emergency surgical suite and was training civilians in basic first aid. Her calm efficiency in the face of impending danger reminded why he had fallen in love with her 12 years ago. Had surprised everyone with his leadership abilities. The nervous administrator who had been slowly cracking under the pressure of running a failing colony had been replaced by a focused military strategist. It turned out that before his career in colonial administration, had served as a tactical officer in the Human Defense Force during the border conflicts with the Empire. "The orbital platforms are our biggest weakness," explained during an emergency planning session. "We've got basic defensive shields and one antiquated plasma cannon that was designed to clear asteroid debris, not fight off a military fleet." Studied the tactical display showing 442B's orbital infrastructure. The colony's space-based assets were embarrassingly minimal: a few communications satellites, a weather monitoring station, and the single defensive platform had mentioned. "What about the mining equipment in orbit?" asked Chief Engineer Kate. "The automated extraction platforms might not be designed for combat, but they've got industrial-grade cutting lasers and strong structural integrity." Size lit up. "Kate, you might be onto something. Can we modify them?" "Give me 24 hours and access to every spare component in the colony," Kate replied with determination. "I can't promise much, but I might be able to turn our mining platforms into something that could surprise an attacking fleet." Found himself assigned to a different but equally crucial task. His knowledge of biology and technology, limited though it was, made him the colony's closest thing to an expert on their enemies. He spent hours analyzing every scrap of data they had about the alien traders and their culture. What he discovered was troubling. They weren't just aggressive expansionists, they were systematic in their conquests. They had a pattern of testing potential targets with seemingly innocent trade offers, gathering intelligence about defensive capabilities, and then following up with overwhelming force to claim valuable resources. The fact that they had sent a weaponized creature suggested they viewed the human colony as a significant enough threat to require careful assessment. That meant either the colony possessed something of extraordinary value, or they had learned to fear human military capabilities. Suspected it was both. "Doctor, we need you in the communications center," called out Lieutenant Torres, one of the security officers who had survived the attack with minor injuries. Found a crowd gathered around the colony's main communication array. The equipment was crackling with an incoming message, but the signal was heavily distorted and fragmentary. "Human vessel Delta 7, under attack, fleet, 3 hours out, massive force, recommend immediate." The signal dissolved into static, leaving the colonists staring at each other in grim silence. "That was from the supply ship," said quietly, "the one that was supposed to arrive 3 months ago." "They're still 3 hours behind the main fleet," Torres pointed out, "if they manage to break away from the attack. Then they're bringing warning and possibly additional defensive capabilities," finished. "But they're also bringing a pursuing force that's likely even larger than what we were expecting." Felt a chill of realization. They hadn't just sent a single fleet to attack an isolated colony. They had intercepted and been fighting human ships for months, possibly longer. This wasn't a random raid, it was part of a larger campaign. "We need to assume we're facing a much larger force than originally estimated," he told. "And we need to prepare for the possibility that New Eden isn't their only target." The next few hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. Kate worked miracles with the orbital mining platforms, somehow managing to network their systems and jury-rig additional weapons from spare parts and salvaged equipment. The platforms wouldn't last long in a real space battle, but they might provide enough of a surprise to buy the colony precious time. On the surface, every available person was involved in defensive preparations. The colony's engineers had managed to activate an old shield generator that had been mothballed due to power constraints. It wouldn't stop a serious orbital bombardment, but it could protect against smaller weapons and give the evacuation shelters time to fill. Found himself working with Doctor, the colony's on a project that seemed almost absurdly academic given the circumstances. They were analyzing this neural implants, trying to understand biotechnology. These modifications are incredibly sophisticated, observed, her scanner revealing layer after layer of artificial neural pathways in the dead creature's brain. The level of biological engineering suggests a civilization with centuries of experience in genetic manipulation. Nodded, but his attention was focused on something else. Look at these control frequencies, he said, pointing to readings from his M-field generator. The implants are designed to respond to specific electromagnetic signals. That's how they controlled the creature's behavior. Remote control, breathed. They could activate its aggressive programming from a distance. Which means they have a command signal protocol, said, his mind racing. If we can decode it, we might be able to turn their own biotechnology against them. The breakthrough came 6 hours before the fleet was scheduled to arrive. Had been running analysis programs on the neural implant frequencies when his computer suddenly chimed with a match. The control signals weren't unique to they followed a standard pattern used throughout military biotechnology. Called excitedly into his communicator, "I need you to see this." When the administrator arrived at the lab, showed him the decoded signal patterns. It's not just the creatures they control remotely. Look at these frequency ranges. They correspond to the neural activity patterns of soldiers themselves. His expression shifted from confusion to understanding. You're saying they use implants to control their own people. Not control exactly, but influence. Enhanced aggression, reduced fear response, improved coordination. The same type of modifications they made to but adapted for their own species. And if we can jam or disrupt those signals, we might be able to turn their greatest advantage into a weakness, finished. Working with Kate, spent the next few hours modifying the colony's communication array to broadcast a disruption signal on the control frequencies. It was a desperate gambit, but it was better than simply waiting to be overwhelmed by superior numbers. The first sign of the approaching fleet came from the orbital sensors. 27 vessels dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, their configuration clearly military, and their course directly toward 442b. 3 hours later, a smaller ship emerged from hyperspace, badly damaged and trailing atmosphere. It was the human supply vessel Delta 7, somehow having survived its encounter with the alien fleet. "This is captain of the supply ship Delta 7 requesting emergency landing clearance," came the crackling transmission. "We have critical intelligence about the attacking fleet, and other colonies need warning." Felt his blood turn to ice. Other colonies. The campaign was even larger than he had feared. The damaged ship managed a controlled crash, landing in the colony's expanded landing area. Captain emerged with a crew of 12 survivors, all showing signs of extended combat stress and multiple injuries. "How many other colonies?" asked without preamble as Sarah treated the captain's wounds. "At least 6 that we know of," replied grimly. "They have been systematically attacking human settlements across this entire sector. We managed to escape from the battle at New Santiago, but—" he shook his head. "The colony didn't make it." Sarah's hands stilled for a moment in their treatment of his injuries. New Santiago had been home to nearly 5,000 colonists, including many families with young children. "They're not just raiding," continued. "They're eliminating human presence in this region entirely. Something has them scared, and they've decided we're a threat that needs to be removed before we become too established." Exchanged glances with. Their earlier analysis had been correct. This was about more than simple territorial expansion. They viewed humanity as a long-term threat to their dominance. "What kind of resistance have the other colonies managed?" asked. "Varies," said. "New Santiago had better defenses than most, but they were still overwhelmed. They have learned to expect human innovation and adaptability. They're not taking chances anymore. They hit fast and hard with overwhelming force." "How long do we have?" Kate asked from where she was monitoring the approaching fleet. Checked his chronometer. Based on their current approach vector and deceleration pattern, maybe 2 hours before they're in weapons range. The final preparations were a study in controlled chaos. Every colonist who could hold a weapon was armed and assigned to defensive positions. The evacuation shelters were stocked with supplies for extended siege conditions. The modified mining platforms had been positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire around the planet's orbital approaches. Stood in the colony's command center, watching the tactical displays as 27 enemy ships closed in on their small world. Beside him, Sarah checked and rechecked her medical supplies, her professional calm masking what he knew was deep anxiety about the coming battle. You know, when I married you, I thought the most dangerous thing we'd face together would be exotic diseases and maybe the occasional equipment failure, she said quietly. Managed a small smile. I seem to remember promising for better or worse. I just didn't expect the worst to include alien invasion fleets. No regrets, Sarah said firmly. If we're going to face the end, I'm glad we're facing it together. The fleet dropped into orbit with military precision. Their ships were sleek and predatory, designed for war rather than exploration. As watched, they began deploying an attack formation, clearly preparing for orbital bombardment. All stations report ready, announced over the colony-wide communication system. Remember, we're not just fighting for New Eden, we're fighting for every human colony in this sector. Make them pay for every meter. The first weapon strikes came without warning or attempt at communication. Brilliant beams of coherent energy lanced down from orbit, targeting the colony's power generation facilities and communication arrays. The defensive shields flared and held, but could see they wouldn't last long under sustained bombardment. Mining platforms, execute attack pattern Alpha, Kate commanded from her engineering station. The modified orbital platforms, which had been disguised as inactive debris, suddenly came to life. Industrial cutting lasers, never designed for combat but devastating in their focused intensity, reached out across space to touch the attacking ships. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Two vessels, caught completely off guard by the unexpected attack, suffered critical damage to their power systems. One began to drift helplessly, while the other exploded in a brilliant fireball as its reactor containment failed. They weren't expecting that, Kate shouted triumphantly, but could see that the surprise wouldn't last. The remaining ships were already adapting, shifting their formation to account for the hidden weapons platforms. Their return fire was precise and overwhelming. Within minutes, 3 of the mining platforms had been destroyed, and the rest were taking heavy damage. Initiating jamming protocol, announced, activating the modified communication array. The disruption signals spread out from the planet's surface, targeting the neural control frequencies they had identified in the implants. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the fleet formation began to waver. Individual ships started breaking away from their assigned positions, their pilots apparently struggling with compromised neural enhancements. Weapon targeting became erratic, and several ships nearly collided as their crews fought against their own modified nervous systems. "It's working," called out. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up." But even as he spoke, the fleet was beginning to adapt again. Some ships were activating what looked like hardened communication systems, while others were simply shutting down their enhancement networks entirely. The jamming effect was temporary at best. The battle settled into a grim pattern of thrust and counter-thrust. The human defenders used every trick they could devise: false sensor readings, improvised weapons, and tactics that relied on innovation rather than superior firepower. They responded with overwhelming force and gradual adaptation to each new strategy. Watched the tactical displays with growing despair. They were inflicting casualties on the alien fleet, more than they had probably expected from a small colony. But the mathematics of the situation were inexorable. The aliens had more ships, better weapons, and the ability to replace their losses. Sarah called out from her medical station. "I'm getting casualty reports from the outer defensive positions. The bombardment is starting to break through." He looked at the readouts showing shield strength dropping rapidly under sustained fire. They had perhaps another hour before the defensive perimeter collapsed entirely. Then Captain appeared at his elbow, carrying a data pad with information downloaded from his damaged ship. "Doctor, I've been analyzing the intel we gathered about the fleet," said urgently. "There's something you need to see." Looked at the data and felt his heart skip a beat. Hidden in the technical specifications of the alien ships was a critical weakness. Their power distribution systems were centralized through a single command vessel, designed to coordinate the neural enhancement networks across the entire fleet. If we could take out the command ship, said slowly, the entire fleet would lose coordination. More than that, replied. Look at these power flow diagrams. The command ship isn't just coordinating the neural networks, it's providing backup power to half the fleet through transmitted energy beams. Take it out, and you disable or destroy at least 12 other ships. Stared at the tactical display, identifying the command vessel by its position at the center of the fleet formation and its distinctive configuration. It was the largest ship, heavily armored and protected by layers of escort vessels. How do we reach it? Asked, having overheard the conversation. We don't have anything that can penetrate that defensive screen. Looked around the command center, taking in the faces of the people who had become his extended family over the past 3 years. Sarah, quietly organizing medical supplies with the efficiency that had saved dozens of lives. Kate, somehow keeping the failing defensive systems operational through sheer force of will, making impossible decisions with steady determination. These weren't soldiers or warriors. They were scientists, engineers, doctors, and administrators who had volunteered to build a new world in the depths of space. But they were also something more. They were humans, and humans had never learned how to give up. I might have an idea, said quietly, but it's going to require everything we have, and there's no guarantee it will work. Tell us, said simply, pointed to the remains of the mining platform still functioning in orbit. Kate, how much of the platform control network is still operational? Maybe 40%, she replied. Why? Because those platforms weren't just mining equipment. They were also designed to move asteroids and large chunks of raw material, if we could coordinate them properly. Understanding dawned in Kate's eyes. You want to use them as kinetic weapons, ram them into the command ship. Not just ram, said, his plan crystallizing as he spoke. Guide them in with precision targeting while broadcasting the jamming signal at maximum power. The neural disruption should interfere with their defensive systems right at the moment of impact. Was already running calculations on his tactical computer. It might work, he said slowly, but we'd have to sacrifice every remaining platform, and there's no guarantee they'd penetrate the command ship's defenses. There's another problem, Sarah added quietly. The platforms don't have enough automated guidance capability for that kind of precision attack. Someone would have to pilot them manually. The command center fell silent as the implications sank in. A manual guidance mission would be a one-way trip. The platforms had no life support systems, no return capability, and would be flying directly into the teeth of the enemy fleet's defensive fire. I'll do it, said simply. No, Sarah said immediately. Absolutely not. Sarah, I'm the only one who understands both the technology and the platform control systems well enough to make this work. Then we find another way, she insisted. We don't sacrifice people we can't replace. Took her hands in his, looking into her eyes. Sarah, if this fails, we all die anyway. At least this way we have a chance. The debate was interrupted by an urgent alarm from the tactical station. The bombardment had intensified, and the colony's shields were failing faster than anticipated. 15 minutes until total shield collapse, Tors reported grimly. Squeezed Sarah's hands. I have to go. The platforms won't reach the command ship if I wait any longer. Stepped forward. As colony administrator, I should order you not to do this. But you won't, replied, because you know it's our best chance. Nodded slowly. Godspeed, Doctor, make it count. As prepared to leave for the shuttle that would take him to the orbital platforms, Sarah grabbed his arm. When you first told me about that alien creature, you said it would slay me, but it didn't. Smiled sadly. No, it didn't. You were stronger than either of us realized. Come back to me, Sarah whispered fiercely. Find a way to come back. Kissed her, memorizing the moment, then turned and walked toward what might be his final mission. Behind him, the defenders of New Eden prepared to discover whether human determination could triumph over overwhelming odds. Had never expected to die in space, but as his small shuttle approached the crippled mining platform designated Platform 7, he found himself strangely calm about the prospect. The fleet spread out before him like a constellation of deadly stars, their weapons still hammering the colony's failing defenses below. The platform's docking bay had been damaged in the earlier fighting, forcing to perform a dangerous manual coupling with his shuttle. As he worked the controls, He could see the massive command ship at the center of the alien formation, its hull bristling with weapons and defensive systems. Platform 7 responding to manual control, he reported back to the colony. Beginning approach run on primary target. Sarah's voice crackled through the communication system, distorted by the electromagnetic interference from the ongoing battle. We're showing multiple interceptors moving to block your approach vector. Through the platform's sensor array, could see the enemy fighters accelerating toward him. Sleek, deadly vessels designed specifically for close combat, they would reach him long before he could close the distance to the command ship. But Kate had prepared for this contingency. All remaining platforms, transmitted on the secure frequency, execute coordinated approach, spread formation, maximum jamming. Across the orbital space around 442b, the last surviving mining platforms came to life simultaneously. Each one was piloted by a volunteer colonist who had insisted on joining in what everyone understood was a suicide mission. Doctor guided Platform 3 with the same careful precision she used in archaeological excavations. Chief botanist David handled Platform 12 with surprising skill for someone who normally worked with plants rather than machinery. Even had insisted on taking control of Platform 15, leaving the colony's tactical coordination in the hands of his deputy. The coordinated assault caught the fleet off guard for the second time. As 12 massive platforms accelerated toward different target ships while broadcasting neural jamming signals, the alien formation dissolved into chaos. Watched his displays as ships began firing wildly, their targeting systems disrupted by the electromagnetic interference. Several alien vessels collided with each other as their pilots struggled against compromised neural enhancements. The interceptors that had been moving to stop suddenly veered off course, their flight systems apparently overloaded by the jamming signals. "It's working," Kate's voice came through the communication array. "The jamming is more effective when broadcast from multiple sources. They can't adapt fast enough." But could see that their success was temporary. Already, some ships were activating hardened backup systems, shutting down their enhancement networks entirely rather than risk continued disruption. The alien fleet was learning, adapting with the speed that had made them dominant across multiple star systems. "All platforms target your assigned vessels," transmitted. "We won't get another chance like this." Platform 3, guided by, struck the first blow. Her target was a cruiser that had been providing fire support for the command ship. The mining platform, massing over 50,000 tons and moving at significant velocity, hit the alien vessel amidships with devastating effect. The cruiser simply disintegrated under the impact, its debris spreading across space in an expanding cloud of twisted metal. Platform 12 followed seconds later, David somehow managing to guide his unwieldy craft into a perfect collision with a destroyer. The alien ship's shields flared and failed under the kinetic assault, and the vessel broke apart in a series of brilliant explosions. But the fleet was fighting back now. Concentrated fire from multiple ships overwhelmed Platform 6 before Dr. Stevens could reach his target. Watched in horror as his colleague's platform exploded in a fireball that briefly the system's star. Sarah's voice cut through the tactical chatter. "You need to accelerate. The command ship is beginning evasive maneuvers." She was right. The massive alien vessel had recognized the threat and was attempting to move away from the attacking platforms. Its escort ships were forming a protective screen, their weapons targeting the remaining human attackers with deadly precision. Pushed Platform 7's engines beyond their safety limits, feeling the massive structure shudder around him as it accelerated toward its target. Through the viewports, he could see the command ship growing larger, its weapons systems tracking his approach. The first enemy weapons found him when he was still 30 kilometers from impact. Energy beams designed to vaporize asteroids slashed across Platform 7's hull, tearing away external equipment and opening the interior sections to vacuum. The platform's artificial gravity failed, leaving floating in his command harness as debris tumbled around him. "Platform 7 taking heavy damage," he reported, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Still on target." 20 kilometers. The command ship filled his forward screen now, its hull revealing details that hadn't been visible at longer range. Could see weapon emplacements, sensor arrays, and what looked like the main power distribution network that had identified in his intelligence data. Platform 15, piloted by, reached its target first. The colony administrator had chosen one of the escort vessels, a heavily armed cruiser that had been methodically destroying the other platforms. His impact was perfect, catching the alien ship just as its shields recycled between defensive volleys. The cruiser cracked like an egg, its internal structure unable to withstand the kinetic energy transfer. 15 kilometers. The command ship's defensive fire was becoming impossibly intense. Could feel Platform 7 coming apart around him as energy beams carved through its structure. Warning alarms filled the command module, most of them indicating system failures that would have been catastrophic under normal circumstances. But these weren't normal circumstances. 10 kilometers. The alien vessel was attempting to bring its main weapons to bear, massive cannon that could probably vaporize Platform 7 entirely if they achieved a direct hit. Began evasive maneuvers, using the platform's attitude thrusters to make his approach less predictable. Through the tactical display, he could see that most of the other platforms had reached their targets. The coordinated attack had crippled nearly half the fleet, but the survivors were regrouping, and the nuclear jamming effect was beginning to weaken as the enemy adapted their systems. 5 kilometers. The command ship's point defense systems opened up with everything they had. Streams of projectiles and energy bursts filled the space around Platform 7, creating a deadly maze that seemed impossible to navigate. Felt the platform take hit after hit, each impact sending shockwaves through the damaged structure. Then the main power grid failed, and Platform 7 went dark. Emergency lighting flickered to life, casting an eerie red glow through the command module. Most of the control systems were offline, and realized with growing despair that he had lost the ability to make course corrections. The platform was still moving toward the command ship, but his trajectory was slightly off target. He was going to miss. "Sarah," he transmitted on the emergency frequency, knowing this might be his last communication. "I'm sorry, the platform's guidance is gone. I don't think I can complete the mission." Her response came back immediately, strong and clear despite the interference. "Listen to me. You still have attitude thrusters on your suit. If you can get outside and use them to push against the platform's hull, you might be able to correct your approach vector." Looked through the viewports at the command ship, now less than 2 kilometers away. The idea was insane, using a personal suit thruster to adjust the course of a 50,000-ton platform, but it was the only chance they had. He sealed his environmental suit and moved toward the platform's damaged hull, where a breach in the outer skin would allow him access to space. As he prepared to exit the relative safety of the command module, he thought about Sarah's words when he had first told her about She had been stronger than either of them realized. Now it was his turn to be stronger than he thought possible. The breach was larger than it had appeared from inside, a ragged gap that allowed him to see directly through to the command ship. Activated his suit thrusters and began pushing against Platform 7's hull, trying to use the small amount of thrust available to nudge the massive platform's trajectory. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The platform continued on its original course, still angled to pass just to one side of the alien vessel, but gradually began to see a change in his relative position to the target. The platform was shifting, slowly but perceptibly, back toward a collision course. The command ship's weapons found him then. Energy beams designed to destroy spacecraft turned the space around him into a hellscape of deadly radiation. Felt his suit's radiation shielding overload and fail, but he continued firing his thrusters, making tiny adjustments to ensure the platform would hit its target. 1 kilometer. The alien ship was enormous at this range, its hull stretching out beyond's field of vision. He could see individual weapon emplacements tracking his approach, their targeting systems trying to acquire a lock on the irregularly moving platform. 500 meters. Suit systems were failing rapidly under the bombardment. His air supply was contaminated, his radiation exposure was climbing into lethal ranges, and most of his thruster fuel was exhausted. But Platform 7 was on target now, aimed directly at the command ship's central power distribution hub. 200 meters. The vessel filled the universe, its hull details sharp and clear in the reflected light of energy weapons. Could see alien crew members through transparent sections of the ship, their elongated forms moving frantically as they realized the collision was inevitable. 50 meters, stopped fighting to control the platform's approach. His work was done. Platform 7 would hit its target with enough force to cripple or destroy the command ship, and the loss of fleet coordination would give the colony a fighting chance. He thought about Sarah, probably watching the tactical display from the command center, knowing that he wasn't coming home. He thought about the other volunteers who had given their lives in this desperate gambit. Most of all, he thought about the future generations of humans who would colonize the stars, and whether this sacrifice would buy them the time they needed to build something worth preserving. The impact, when it came, was beyond description. 50,000 tons of mining platforms struck the command ship at nearly 10% the speed of light. The collision released energy equivalent to a nuclear weapon, vaporizing both vessels in a flash of light that briefly illuminated the entire solar system. Died instantly, but his sacrifice achieved everything he had hoped for and more. The destruction of the command ship sent cascading failures through the fleet's power distribution network. 12 ships lost main power immediately, their systems crashing as the transmitted energy beams that had been sustaining them vanished. 3 others suffered catastrophic reactor failures as feedback from the destroyed command vessel overloaded their containment systems. But more importantly, the loss of the central coordination hub left the remaining alien ships unable to communicate effectively or coordinate their assault. Individual captains found themselves fighting isolated battles against an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move. Because the humans of New Eden had learned something crucial about their attackers. The greatest strength, their networked coordination and enhanced neural systems, was also their greatest weakness when disrupted. Without their technological advantages, they were no match for human adaptability and determination. Sarah watched from the command center as the alien fleet began to break apart. Some ships attempted to maintain the assault, but their targeting was erratic and their formation discipline had collapsed. Others simply, apparently deciding that the cost of continuing the attack had become unacceptable. "Doctor," Kate called out from her engineering station, "I'm reading massive power fluctuations from the remaining vessels. I think their entire fleet network is cascading into failure." Sarah nodded, but her attention was focused on the expanding debris field where her husband had died. The tactical displays showed no sign of survivors from Platform 7 or the command ship. Was gone, along with all the other volunteers who had piloted the platforms to their targets. "Status report," she said quietly, assuming command of the colony as the surviving senior staff officer. "Fleet is in full retreat," Lieutenant Torres reported. 15 enemy vessels destroyed or disabled, 12 more withdrawing. The colony's defensive perimeter is holding. Casualties. Surprisingly light, considering. We lost 37 people in the platform missions, plus maybe a dozen more from the bombardment. Could have been much worse. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, thinking about the cost of their victory. 37 people who had volunteered to die so that the rest of the colony could survive. 37 families that would never be whole again. But they had succeeded. The threat had been neutralized, at least for now. And more importantly, they had proven that humanity could stand against alien aggression and win. Over the following hours, as the full extent of their victory became clear, Sarah began receiving communications from other human colonies across the sector. Word of New Eden's successful defense was spreading rapidly, carried by the same communication networks that had brought news of the attacks. The message was simple but powerful. Humans could be conquered, but they would never give up fighting. Every victory against them would cost more than the attackers were willing to pay. Every defeat would only make them more determined to find a way to win. Captain, his ship repaired enough for basic operations, prepared to carry that message to Earth and the inner colonies. The data collected during the battle, technical specifications of ships, analysis of their neural enhancement systems, tactical information about their fleet organization, would be invaluable for preparing future defenses. But the most important part of his cargo would be the story of what had happened at New Eden. The tale of how a small group of civilians had turned mining equipment into weapons, used an alien creature's implants to develop electronic warfare tactics, and ultimately sacrificed their lives to save their community. It was a very human story, a story of people who refused to be victims, who found strength in each other, and who chose to fight rather than surrender even when the odds seemed impossible. As Sarah stood in the colony's rebuilt command center 3 weeks later, Watching the sunset paint 442B's sky in shades of purple and gold, she thought about his final words to her. He had promised to find a way to come back, and in a sense, he had. His sacrifice had ensured that she and the rest of the colonists had a future to build. The attack that had started everything seemed like a lifetime ago. Had been right about the creature being dangerous, but wrong about what would happen to Sarah. The alien beast hadn't slayed her. It had revealed something about human nature that even humanity's enemies were beginning to understand. Humans didn't just survive in hostile environments. They thrived. They adapted. They turned every challenge into an opportunity to become stronger. They had sent their creature to test the colony's defenses and had instead taught the humans how to fight back. They had attacked with overwhelming force and had instead demonstrated that human ingenuity could overcome superior technology. Most importantly, they had tried to break the human spirit and had instead forged it into something stronger than they could have imagined. New Eden was safe, but the war was far from over. Other colonies were under attack. Other battles were being fought across the galaxy. But now humanity knew that it could win, and that knowledge would spread from world to world like wildfire. They had made a critical error in their understanding of human nature. They had assumed that once they eliminated a few colonies, the rest would surrender or flee. Instead, they had created an enemy that would never stop fighting, never stop adapting, and never stop finding new ways to turn their own weapons against them. Had believed that the alien creature would destroy his wife. Instead, it had helped reveal the indomitable nature of the human spirit. The thought they were eliminating a potential threat to their dominance. What they had actually done was declare war on the most dangerous species in the galaxy. As Sarah watched the stars emerge in the darkening sky, she knew that somewhere among those distant points of light, human colonies were preparing for battle using the tactics developed at New Eden. The story of Platform 7 and the volunteers who had died to save their community would inspire countless other acts of heroism. They had wanted to teach humanity fear. Instead, they had taught humans something much more valuable, that when faced with impossible odds, sometimes the most human response was to attempt the impossible and succeed. The alien beast was dead, the fleet was defeated, and humanity had taken its first steps toward becoming the dominant force in the galaxy, one desperate battle at a time. Had been wrong about the alien creature slaying his wife, but he had been absolutely right about something else. When humans were threatened, they became capable of things that all reason. And sometimes, that was exactly what the universe needed.